The story is usually told as an anecdote about stubbornness. Burt Bacharach played the piano. He showed Tom Jones exactly how the song should go, the tempo, the phrasing, the specific emotional quality he had written into the music when he wrote it. He explained the architecture of the piece, the choices that were structural rather than arbitrary, the reasons that certain notes arrived at certain moments and not others. He was patient and thorough, because Burt Bacharach was always patient and thorough when it came to his own music, because his own music had been thought through with a precision that very few composers brought to popular song. And then Tom Jones sang it differently anyway. The story stops there, usually. It stops at the anecdote, the composer versus the singer, the stubbornness of the performer overriding the intention of the writer, the amusing collision of two strong personalities in a recording studio. It is a good anecdote. It is not, however, the complete story. The complete story is about what happened to the song when Tom Jones sang it his way. And the complete story is about what Burt Bacharach thought of what he heard. Not immediately, which was one kind of reaction, but later, which was a different kind entirely. Burt Bacharach in 1969 was at the precise center of a run of creative achievement that had redefined what a pop song could do, structurally and harmonically. He had written Walk On By. He had written What the World Needs Now Is Love. He had written Alfie. He had written songs that were being recorded by virtually every significant popular performer of the decade, songs that appeared, on first hearing, to be simpler than they were, and that revealed, on repeated listening, a harmonic and rhythmic sophistication that the pop format had not previously been understood to contain. He was not a craftsman of popular music. He was an architect of it. He came to that architecture from the conservatory, from the formal training in composition and orchestration that gave him a specific technical vocabulary for what he was doing. He had been a piano accompanist for Marlene Dietrich in the 1950s, had spent years learning at the highest available level what the relationship between a voice and a musical arrangement could be. By the time he was writing for Dionne Warwick in the early 1960s, the collaboration that would produce some of the most enduring work either of them would ever do, he had a complete and carefully developed theory of how a great song worked. Part of that theory was about the relationship between a composer's intention and a performer's interpretation. Bacharach had strong views on this. He was not a composer who wrote songs as raw material for other people's creativity. He wrote songs that were finished, that had a specific shape and a specific emotional trajectory, and a specific set of internal relationships between the melody and the harmony and the rhythm that he had thought through carefully and that he wanted preserved. His preference was always for the singer who could inhabit the song he had written, rather than the singer who made the song into something else. What his nature required was to sing the song the way it felt right to sing, not the way it looked right on paper. The feeling and the notation were not always the same thing. For Tom Jones, the feeling had priority. This had always been true. It was the source of everything that made him the performer he was, and it was the source of most of what his producers and writers and collaborators found simultaneously magnificent and sometimes maddening. He sang it his way. Burt Bacharach listened. There was a specific quality to the silence after Tom Jones finished. It was not the silence of someone who had been proven wrong, though it contained some of that. It was not entirely the silence of someone who had been proven right, though it contained some of that too. It was the silence of a man who had heard his composition become something he had not intended it to be, and who was in the process of deciding what he thought about that. The process took a moment, possibly more than a moment. The studio had the particular quality of a space in which something has just happened that the people present are still in the process of classifying. The band was quiet. The producers were watching Bacharach. The floor manager had stopped consulting his clipboard. Tom Jones was standing at the microphone with the uncomplicated expression of a man who had done the job and was ready to do it again if required. What no one in the room could fully articulate, in that moment, was whether what had just happened was the composer's song or the singer's song. It was both. It was neither. It was the thing that happened at the intersection of a specific composition and a specific voice. A third thing that belonged to neither party and to both of them simultaneously, that could only exist in the space between the intention and the performance, in the gap that every composer tries to close, and that the best performers always, somehow, fill with something better than what was specified. What Burt Bacharach said afterward, in various contexts and with varying degrees of directness over the following years, was that Tom Jones sang his songs the way no one else sang them, including the ways Bacharach himself had imagined them. That the voice carried the architecture of the song to a place that the sheet music had pointed toward, but not fully arrived at. That there was something in what Tom Jones did with a melody that the composer's instruction could not have produced, and that the composer, in retrospect, understood was the thing the song had needed. This was not easy for a man with Bacharach's relationship to his own compositions. It required a specific quality of intellectual honesty and artistic generosity to acknowledge that a performer had improved upon what you had written by departing from what you had written. Most composers of that precise architectural bent would not make that acknowledgement. Burt Bacharach made it. Not immediately, not in the room, but over time, in the way that the most honest assessments tend to arrive when the defensiveness has had time to settle. The This Is Tom Jones television program was, among other things, a laboratory for exactly this kind of encounter. Tom had been building the show since 1969, as a vehicle for the specific kind of musical exploration that his Las Vegas performances and his recording sessions did not always allow. A space where he could stand in the same room as the people who had written and performed the music that had shaped him, where the conversation between a voice and its sources could happen in real time, in front of cameras, without the constraints of a recording engineer's clock or a showroom booking contract. He had invited Burt Bacharach onto the show because he wanted to perform Bacharach's music with Bacharach present, and because he understood, at some level, that this was going to produce a situation that could not be predicted from either side. Bacharach had come because the show was watched by the right people, and because Tom Jones's voice was, whatever one thought of his approach to an arrangement, undeniably one of the most significant instruments in popular music. He had agreed to appear in the same professional spirit with which he approached all his television commitments, prepared, precise, ready to exercise the level of quality control that his work required. He brought with him the specific confidence of a man who had spent 20 years being right about his own music. The collision was professional, courteous, and genuine. Two people who were completely certain about two different things regarding the same piece of music, in the same room, with a camera running and a studio audience waiting. Tom Jones was not that singer Bacharach had in mind, not in the sense that Bacharach meant. Tom Jones was 31 years old in 1969. He had been performing professionally since his late teens. He had recorded dozens of songs, performed hundreds of nights in Las Vegas and London and everywhere in between. And in all of those performances and all of those recordings, the relationship between his voice and the music he was given had always operated according to the same principle, which was that the music passed through him before it reached anyone else. He could not prevent this. He had not tried to prevent it. It was the nature of the instrument. Not a guitar or a piano, which could be played at whatever dynamic the composer specified, but a human voice shaped by a specific life and a specific body and a specific emotional history that could not be removed from the music without removing the music. Tom Jones was a singer who made everything he touched into something that passed through his particular sensibility before it arrived at the audience. This was not conscious or calculated. It was the natural result of a voice with that much specific character and that much specific history. A Tom Jones performance of a song was never simply the song. It was always the song refracted through the specific quality of who Tom Jones was. Through Wales and the clubs and the chapel choir and the factory and the particular physical and emotional constitution of a man who had been given one of the most remarkable natural instruments of his generation and had been spending it freely and without calculation since the age of 12. When Burt Bacharach sat down at the piano and showed Tom Jones how the song was supposed to go, he was describing the song he had written. He was entirely correct in his description. The song he had written was the song he described. Tom Jones listened. He asked questions. He understood the answers. He understood the choices Burt had made and the reasons behind them. He was not dismissing the explanation. He was absorbing it in the way Tom Jones absorbed things, which was to take them completely into himself and then do with them what his nature required. Tom Jones, for his part, did not understand this at the time as a triumph over the composer. He understood it as singing the way he always sang, with everything available, guided by feeling rather than instruction, trusting his own instinct over any external specification of what the thing was supposed to be. He had not been making a statement. He had been doing his job. What his job turned out to be, in those moments, in the studio, on the stage, in the television rehearsal room, everywhere he was given a song and a microphone, was to take what had been written and make it into what it could fully be. Not what the composer intended, what the song was capable of, when the right voice arrived at the right moment and chose, without deliberation, to give it everything. Burt Bacharach continued writing music for decades after his appearance on the show. He won Academy Awards. He won Grammy Awards. He accumulated the formal recognition that his talent had always deserved, and that the industry, in its slower-moving way, eventually delivered. He spoke about his collaboration with Dionne Warwick as the defining creative relationship of his career, which it was. He did not often speak about Tom Jones's refusal to follow his instruction in a television studio in Los Angeles, but he spoke about it more warmly than the anecdote suggests. He spoke about it as something he had needed to rethink, as the moment when a composer of firm views about his own music had encountered a voice so specifically itself that the views required revision, not abandonment, revision. The principle that a song should be sung as written remained his principle. What he added to it, after Tom Jones, was the qualifier, unless the voice that arrives is the kind of voice that knows something the notation does not. Tom Jones was that kind of voice. He had always been that kind of voice, since the first time he had opened his mouth in a working men's club in Pontypridd, and the men at the bar had turned away from their drinks to listen. Nothing that had happened since, not Las Vegas, not television, not the producer's instructions or the composer's demonstration, had altered the fundamental truth of what the voice was and what it required. What it required was to sing as it was, not as it was told. The story is usually told as an anecdote about stubbornness. The complete story is about what happens to a great song when a great voice treats a composer's blueprint not as a ceiling, but as a floor. In the end, even Burt Bacharach agreed that this was the right answer. It just took him a moment to get there.